Welcome to the Pocket MBA. This is the place for, well, the essential strategic knowledge you need to navigate and really lead in today's economy.
And today we're undertaking, I think, a really critical exploration of what genuinely drives human performance inside our organizations. It's quite a journey, actually.
It really is. It takes us from, the bedrock of human needs, stuff that was established almost a century ago, all the way to the advanced behavioral science that's defining how we get work done right now.
That's right. Our mission today is to give you that motivational toolkit that every modern manager needs. We'll start with Maslow's foundational thinking. Spend a good amount of time dissecting Frederick Herzberg's profound and often counterintuitive model.
And then we'll connect all of that history to the 21st century paradigm shift we see in Daniel Pink's work on intrinsic drive.
It is a genuine evolution in perspective. We're moving from treating employees primarily as, let's say, economic inputs who are driven by transactions.
Just cogs in a machine.
Precisely. To recognizing them as psychological beings who are craving things like growth and autonomy and purpose. And understanding this evolution is, I would argue, absolutely non-negotiable for anyone leading a knowledge worker today.
Okay, so let's set the stage. Let's start with the concept that really revolutionized organizational psychology, the hierarchy of human needs.
We have to begin with Abraham Maslow. His work in the 1940s and 50s gave us the first widely adopted framework for understanding human motivation. He introduced the need hierarchy.
This is the famous pyramid model, right? The one everyone sees in Psych 101.
That's the one. It organizes our needs from physiological survival at the very base, moving up through safety, belonging, esteem, and then right at the pinnacle, self-actualization.
The pyramid itself isn't the key takeaway for managers, is it?
No, not at all. The critical concept, the one that management so often overlooks, is the hierarchy of prepotency.
Prepotency, what does that mean exactly?
Maslow argued that our needs exist in an ascending order. A lower need, let's say safety, must be reasonably satisfied before the next, higher need like belonging, can even emerge and become a dominant motivator in a person's life.
So if you're worried about where your next meal is coming from, or if you feel unsafe at work, you're fundamentally not going to be worried about whether your boss recognizes your efforts.
Precisely. Your motivation is entirely captured by that lower level need. And here is the absolutely indispensable managerial takeaway, the one that makes Maslow the foundation for everything that comes after.
Okay.
Once a need is satisfied, it is no longer an active motivator.
Wow. That one sentence, that shifts the entire strategy of employee relations, doesn't it?
Completely.
Because if an employee has a stable income, they've got benefits, they have job security, so their basic and safety needs are met, then just continuing to offer them the same level of stability tomorrow, that can't motivate them to achieve higher performance.
You have merely brought them back to a zero state. You've prevented dissatisfaction, but you haven't created motivation.
You've just stopped the bleeding.
Exactly. The motivational lever has to shift upward. The focus naturally moves to the next unmet need. So if you want to sustain motivation, you have to identify and tap into that next prepotent need. Perhaps it's esteem or even self-actualization.
And that realization that satisfaction and motivation are way more complex than we think, that sets the perfect stage for Frederick Herzberg.
Yes, Herzberg's work is where these concepts really move from general psychology into the concrete world of the workplace. He built on Maslow, but challenged the flawed managerial approaches of his day.
He gave us the motivation hygiene theory, and it's so important because he was the first to provide evidence that satisfaction and dissatisfaction are. They're not opposite.
Not opposites on a single continuum, no. The factors that make you satisfied and engaged with your job are fundamentally structurally different from the factors that make you dissatisfied and miserable.
But before he even got to that breakthrough, he had to confront the management tactic that was just everywhere at the time. He had a great name for it, the kick in the pants. Gita.
It was a very provocative term for the 1960s, but he used it intentionally. He wanted to draw a sharp, unforgettable line between merely eliciting movement and generating true, self-sustaining motivation.
Okay, so what's the difference? Movement versus motivation.
Kita is the surest way to get someone to do something immediately. It works, but it's an external stimulus. If I kick you, I am motivated because my goal of getting you to move has been achieved. But you are merely reacting to an external force.
Meaning the action stops the second that external force is removed. So true motivation has to come from inside. It needs an internal generator, not an external kick.
That is the absolute crux of the argument. And he meticulously categorized the three forms of Kita that managers lean on, often mistaking them for genuine motivation.
Okay, let's start with the most obvious one, the one that is thankfully taboo today.
That would be the negative physical kita. This is the literal application of physical force, a shove, a push. Herzberg noted its drawbacks were, well, its inelegance and the fact that it contradicts the benevolent image most organizations want to project.
And I imagine from a psychological standpoint, it's a disaster.
A complete disaster. It stimulates the autonomic nervous system, the fight or flight response, so the employee is just reacting to stress and threat. They're certainly not thinking creatively or productively.
Then we move to the kind that is, unfortunately, still very common in a lot of workplaces. The psychological kick.
Indeed, the negative psychological kita. This is emotional one-upmanship, intentional embarrassment, veiled threats, constant fear-mongering.
Why do managers prefer this?
Because it's less tangible than physical force. It avoids immediate ethical problems.
Yeah.
But it's insidious. Herzberg pointed out that if an employee complains about this constant emotional manipulation, they can easily be dismissed or even accused of being paranoid, because there's often no tangible proof of a direct attack.
It's all about plausible deniability.
Precisely. And finally, the type that most managers rely on and almost always mistake for real motivation, the carrot. Or, as Herzberg called it, positive kita.
So this is the external reward. Do this for me and I'll give you a raise, a bonus, better stock options.
Exactly. These are incentives, and they absolutely elicit movement. But they suffer from the same fundamental flaw as the physical kick.
How so?
Herzberg used a great analogy. The employee is like a battery. When I charge that employee with a positive incentive, that battery runs down. If I want them to move again tomorrow, what do I have to do?
You have to charge it again.
I have to kick them again. Movement requires constant external recharging. It is not self-sustaining. It creates dependency on the manager for the next kick.
And you mentioned that a lot of common management practices are really just variations of this non-sustaining positive kita.
Oh, decades have been wasted on these. For example, reducing time spent at work, giving more holidays, or a shorter working week.
That sounds good on the surface.
It does, but it only provides a short-term relief. Employees quickly adjust to the new standard, and at that point, they just see it as something they've earned. The relief stops being a motivator.
What about training? Things aimed at making the work environment better.
That falls into two categories, both, he noted, known for chronic failure. First, there's human relations training. The idea was to improve the interpersonal relationships between a boss and their team.
Again, seems logical.
But Herzberg observed that after decades of this, the training often just reinforced hygiene factors. It made the environment less painful, but it never introduced true motivators. It was about damage control, not inspiration.
And when that didn't work, it evolved into something more intensive.
Sensitivity training. And the failure of this is usually rationalized not as a flaw in the theory itself, but, well, we just didn't conduct the courses properly. It's a sort of meta-failure that avoids confronting the reality that environmental adjustment, no matter how sophisticated, isn't motivation.
And what about employee counseling? I know that came out of the Hawthorne experiments.
Yes, counseling was originally meant to let employees unburden themselves of, quote, irrational feelings that might interfere with factory efficiency. But it devolved. Herzberg noted that during World War II, the counselors started trying to solve the problems they were hearing about, forgetting their role was just to be a passive listener.
So all of these things, the carrots, the training, the counseling, they're all missing the point.
They're treating symptoms, they're trying to make the cage more comfortable, instead of asking why the animal doesn't want to run on the wheel in the first place.
That exhaustive critique of why the carrot fails leads us right to the heart of Herzberg's big breakthrough. Because Kita and those simple satisfaction surveys weren't working, he had to find a new way to actually listen to people.
That's right. He needed a research method that wouldn't fall prey to the common biases. Those traditional scaled inventories, rate your salary from 1 to 5, they're unreliable.
Why is that?
They can be affected by the halo effect. If you happen to like your manager, you might subconsciously rate the company's restrictive policies highly, just because you associate them with that positive relationship.
And I assume people don't always want to be honest.
Exactly. There's a social acceptance bias. People naturally want to report positive feelings, especially to an interviewer who they think is associated with management. You don't want to sound like a complainer.
So he shifted the focus away from those generalized ratings to specific causal storytelling.
He and his colleagues developed what they called the critical incident method. So instead of asking abstractly, how important is your salary? They'd interview professionals about concrete sequences of events where they felt especially good about their jobs. They called these the highs, or especially bad, the lows.
So they weren't just asking about mood. They wanted the whole story, the whole causal chain.
Precisely. They focused on three things for each story: the specific first-level factor, which is the event itself, then the resulting attitude, the emotional state, and finally the effect on their performance. They weren't looking for a morale score, they were digging for the root causes of a motivational state.
And they also categorized the incidents by how long they lasted, didn't they?
Yes, they looked at short-range sequences, which were sort of anecdotal one-off events, and long-range sequences, which covered periods of sustained high or low feeling, lasting for weeks or even months.
And that let them distinguish between a temporary good day and a profound lasting change in someone's attitude toward their job.
Exactly. And this methodology is what let them uncover the fundamental asymmetry. The things that cause the highs are not the opposites of the things that cause the lows.
The data was just undeniable. The factors leading to satisfaction were completely different from the factors leading to dissatisfaction. Two independent sets of factors.
That's right. So let's start with the things managers usually focus on, which Herzberg called the hygiene factors.
Hygiene, like keeping things clean.
In a sense, yes. Think of it as psychological hygiene. These factors are extrinsic to the job itself. They are about the job context, the environment. Think of them as factors related to pain avoidance.
So things like your salary, company policy, your supervisor, the physical working conditions.
All classic examples. Now, when these factors are poor, they cause dissatisfaction, no question. But here's the critical distinction. When you improve them, say you give a bigger than expected raise or you install better lighting, you only achieve the prevention of dissatisfaction.
So good hygiene only gets an employee to a neutral baseline, a state of just, not unhappy. You haven't inspired them, you've just made the workplace tolerable.
That is exactly right. They do not generate positive job attitudes or high performance. Herzberg pointed out that a great many things can cause dissatisfaction because the environment is just so broad.
Okay, so if that only gets us to neutral, what are the factors that actually push us into the positive zone, into true self-generated motivation?
Those are the motivator factors. These are intrinsic to the job content. They relate directly to psychological growth. And when they're present, they increase job satisfaction and performance.
But when they're absent?
When they're absent, employees aren't necessarily dissatisfied if the hygiene is good, but they are certainly not achieving high performance. They're just there.
And these are the things that tap into the higher level needs Maslow was talking about.
Precisely. The core motivators that came out of the studies were achievement, recognition, and we have to be specific when it's tied to achievement, the work itself, responsibility, advancement, and the possibility of growth.
And the statistical evidence for this split was pretty compelling.
It was irrefutable from their research. All the primary satisfiers, achievement, responsibility, advancement, they all appeared with significantly greater frequency in the high stories. And crucially, the most powerful factors, achievement and responsibility, they operated almost entirely in one direction.
What do you mean by that?
They appeared in only 7% and 6%, respectively, of the low job attitude stories. They simply are not sources of dissatisfaction. They are pure levers for motivation.
That's fascinating. Let's dig into the nuance of one of the factors that appeared on both sides, though. Recognition. How can that be both a source of satisfaction and dissatisfaction?
A vital point for managers to understand. When recognition showed up in the low stories, it reflected poor company policy and administration. It was about a manager or a system failing to provide deserved feedback or acknowledgement. It was a failure of hygiene, a lack of fairness in the environment.
I worked all weekend on this report, and my boss didn't even mention it.
That's the one. However, when recognition appeared in the high sequences, it was almost always directly tied to a specific act of achievement. It was celebrating a job well done, a successful milestone. So the source and the context determine whether recognition is a true motivator or just highlighting a hygiene problem.
And looking at the long-term emotional health of a job, what factor emerged as the most critical?
Without a doubt, the possible growth factor. This feeling, the belief that professional or personal growth was possible through the job, it showed a 2-to-1 ratio in favor of long-range positive changes in job feelings.
Wow, 2-to-1.
Yes. This strongly suggested to Herzberg that professional growth is the key want of employees. It's the basic determiner of positive, lasting job attitudes.
And the effects of ignoring all this were really tangible, right?
Yeah.
It goes beyond just turnover numbers.
Oh, the consequences of sustained low job attitudes were severe. In their study, about 1 out of every 8 low sequences resulted in the employee actually quitting. And that frequency was higher for people who endured long-range dissatisfaction.
And what about the ones who stayed?
Another 8% were actively taking steps toward quitting. They were looking for other jobs. And beyond that, people reported quitting trying. They'd just put out so-so work, actively drag their feet, and that drags down the whole organization's efficiency.
And there's a mental health aspect here that I think often gets overlooked in these kinds of business discussions.
It does, and the connection is striking. Low job attitudes led to perceived mental health effects. Everything from generalized anxiety to specific physiological manifestations of tension, nausea, severe headaches, loss of appetite.
Really, actual physical symptoms.
In some serious, though rare, cases, the respondents themselves drew a direct line between the tensions at their job and the appearance of psychosomatic issues like ulcers or even cardiac conditions. They genuinely believed their job was making them physically ill.
And on the flip side, the high attitude stories.
Conversely, people in high sequences reported positive effects. They'd say they were sleeping better, eating better. They'd describe their previous dissatisfaction as having led to nervousness and an inability to relax. It's clear that the potential for motivation in one's work contributes massively to a person's overall health and well-being.
Which is why Herzberg's practical advice was so radical for the time.
Yeah.
Stop obsessing over the environment, the hygiene, and start focusing on the work itself, the motivators.
Stop the negative approach and start the positive one.
So if the carrot, the positive kita, and the environment, the hygiene, only prevent dissatisfaction, what's the actual action plan for managers to introduce these motivators?
The solution is job enrichment, or what Herzberg called vertical job loading. This means the systematic, structural provision of motivator factors and opportunities for psychological growth.
Now hold on, job enrichment sounds complicated. It sounds potentially expensive. If I'm a manager on a tight budget, why shouldn't I just stick to raising salaries? That's the easy fix.
Because the salary increase, while it might stop a current complaint, which is a hygiene issue, is just a short-term kick. It doesn't introduce enduring satisfaction from achievement or responsibility. Job enrichment, on the other hand, restructures the work to make the job itself the generator of motivation.
And it's really important to distinguish vertical job loading from something else that sounds similar.
Yes, we must not confuse it with horizontal job loading, which was historically called job enlargement. Horizontal loading just makes a job structurally bigger, but it does not increase responsibility or growth opportunities.
So that's just management saying, here, have more of the same boring thing.
Precisely. Herzberg rejected examples like setting harder production quotas, or rotating employees between departments without giving them any more authority, or having an admin take on more filing tasks. That's just adding more tedious work.
It's not enrichment, it's just enlargement.
Vertical job loading is the introduction of true responsibility. The key principle is that the individual must have some measure of control over how the job is done to genuinely realize that sense of achievement and growth. A manager should be restructuring jobs by granting employees ownership, removing certain top-down controls, and making sure they get direct, actionable feedback.
So in short, Herzberg's message is pretty unequivocal.
Right.
If you have people in a job, you have to use them to the fullest extent of their capabilities.
And if you can't use them, you must either get rid of them or automate the job. And if you can't use them and you can't get out of them, you have a deep systemic organizational motivation problem. And that's all rooted in a failure to provide intrinsic growth.
That perfectly summarizes the whole concept. And it sets the stage perfectly for our next theoretical shift. Because Herzberg gave us that distinction between extrinsic dissatisfaction and intrinsic satisfaction. But as the economy shifted away from routine work and into more conceptual creative knowledge work, the research started to show that even those positive extrinsic rewards, that positive kita, were often actively harmful.
Yes. This is where it gets really interesting.
We're moving into Daniel Pink's work on drive and the failure of what he calls motivation 2.0.
The information economy really challenged the fundamental assumption that if you reward an activity, you get more of it. That reward and punishment model, Motivation 2.0, was becoming incompatible with the non-routine creative nature of most white-collar work.
And there's a perfect example of the clash between the old and the new operating systems, an organizational showdown that happened in the early 2000s.
Ah, yes, the famous confrontation between Microsoft's Encarta Encyclopedia and Wikipedia.
A true David and Goliath story.
It was. Microsoft was operating entirely on Motivation 2.0. They paid highly credentialed professional writers and editors, they had well-compensated managers, and they planned to profit handsomely from the product.
That Wikipedia.
Wikipedia, conversely, relied entirely on intrinsic motivation. It was built by tens of thousands of unpaid hobbyists who contributed their intellectual labor, sometimes for 30 hours a week, for free.
And the economic result just defied all conventional management logic.
In 2010, Microsoft was forced to pull the plug on Encarta. Wikipedia, the all-volunteer, all-amateur model with zero financial extrinsic rewards, became the world's largest and most consulted encyclopedia.
You just can't explain that with a carrot and stick model.
You cannot. It required a new understanding of human behavior, the search for what Pink calls the third drive, our intrinsic motivation.
And this whole insurgency was actually backed by decades of academic research that showed how fragile and how dangerous reward systems can be when you apply them to anything that isn't a mechanistic task. Let's make sure we attribute that research correctly, starting all the way back with Harry Harlow in 1949.
Right. Harry Harlow, he was conducting experiments on rhesus monkeys at the University of Wisconsin. He presented them with these complex mechanical puzzles that required 3 steps to solve, and he was just observing them, expecting to have to introduce rewards later on to get them to work.
But that's not what happened.
No. He observed that the monkeys just began solving the puzzles spontaneously, with tremendous focus and determination. They were working with no obvious biological drive, no hunger, no thirst, no threat, and no external encouragement.
They were just doing it for the fun of it.
Harlow offered the radical theory that the performance of the task provided its own intrinsic reward. The gratification of solving the puzzle was enough, but then he did the crucial intervention. He started rewarding the monkeys with raisins for solving the puzzles.
And what was the immediate result of that?
Their performance was disrupted. They actually started making more errors, and they solved the puzzles less frequently. The introduction of that extrinsic reward reduced their intrinsic pleasure and focus. It showed our whole understanding of motivation was fundamentally flawed.
And that finding was confirmed about 2 decades later, this time with humans, by a researcher named Edward Dacey.
Yes, in 1969, Edward Dacey studied university students who were solving these complex soma puzzles. He separated them into Group A and Group B. In the second session, he paid Group A $1 for each puzzle they solved, while Group B remained unpaid.
And I'm guessing Group A, the paid group, worked harder.
They did, which supports the conventional wisdom, reward me and I'll give you more effort. But the real test came in the third session, the free choice period, where neither group was paid.
Okay, what happened then?
The formerly paid group, Group A, spent significantly less time playing with the puzzle than they had in the PED session. They even spent less time than in the very first session when they first found the puzzles enjoyable.
So the second the external reward was taken away, their intrinsic interest just vanished with it. It's like the money redefined the activity from fun to work.
That is Diss's exact conclusion. When money is used as an external reward for an activity, people lose intrinsic interest in that activity. The rewards give you a short-term boost, but often at the cost of long-term self-generated motivation.
This leads us directly to the systematic critique that Pink developed based on this and other research. The 7 deadly flaws of relying on extrinsic rewards for conceptual work. And we really need to go through these because managers are falling into these traps every single day.
Indeed. The core assumption of Motivation 2.0 that rewards just work. It fails dramatically at the behavioral level as soon as the task requires invention or non-routine problem solving.
Okay, so flaw number 1. Extrinsic rewards can extinguish intrinsic motivation entirely. But wait, that still feels counterintuitive. Why would paying someone to do something they already enjoy make them less interested in it?
Because the reward changes their perception of the task. It's no longer an internal goal. It becomes an external control mechanism. This is the Sawyer effect, which was studied by Lepper and Green. They watched children drawing, which is an intrinsically enjoyable activity.
Right.
When they offered the children external prizes for drawing, the activity was redefined as work. Dece's 1999 meta-analysis of over 100 studies confirmed this. Tangible, contingent rewards have a substantially negative long-term effect on intrinsic motivation. So organizations are prioritizing short-term control, but they're doing considerable and very difficult to reverse damage to the long-term drive of their workforce.
Flaw number 2. They can actually diminish performance, especially for complex tasks.
When a complex task requires inventive thinking, contingent cash rewards narrow the participants' focus. We have to talk about Sam Glucksberg's candle problem.
The famous candle problem.
Participants were asked to fix a candle to a wall using only a box of tacks and some matches. The group that was offered a cash prize for speed took longer to solve the problem than the control group. The reward narrowed their focus, and it blinded them to the inventive, non-obvious solution, which was to use the tack box itself as a platform.
So if the problem requires you to think outside the box, the reward system is literally working against you.
Absolutely. The hyper-focus that the reward induces inhibits the kind of broad, associative thinking you need for a conceptual breakthrough.
Flaw number 3, they can crush creativity. And creativity is the lifeblood of the knowledge economy.
You just have to look at the research by Teresa Amabile. She studied commissioned versus non-commissioned art. Expert panels consistently rated the commissioned work, the art done for a specific reward, as significantly less creative than the art done for intrinsic pleasure, even when the technical skills were identical.
So the reward creates constraints.
Amabile found that the artists who pursued painting for the pleasure of the activity itself, rather than for the reward, produced superior, more creative art in the long run.
Flaw number 4 is fascinating. They can crowd out good behavior. This is where a moral obligation gets redefined as just a financial transaction.
This is a remarkable finding from the economists Nisi and Rusticini and their study of Israeli daycare centers. They introduced a small fine for parents who picked up their children late.
And you'd assume lateness would go down.
But the rate of tardiness increased and stabilized at nearly double the initial rate. The fine replaced the intrinsic moral obligation, I should be fair to the teachers, with a simple transactional cost. It became, I can buy extra time. The punishment promoted the very behavior it was designed to stop.
Wow. Okay, flaw number 5. They can encourage cheating and unethical behavior.
Because extrinsic goals, especially when they're tied to massive bonuses, narrow one's focus so dramatically, individuals can lose sight of broader ethical implications. They resort to shortcuts, gaming the system, or outright cheating to hit that metric. The larger the reward, the greater the incentive to cross the line.
And flaw number 6 connects rewards to addictive behavior, which is really worrying for long-term health.
The neuroscientist Brian Knutson's fMRI research showed that the anticipation of a monetary reward activates the nucleus accumbens in the brain. This is the same physiological process we see in addiction. The dopamine surge creates a craving for another dose.
And that leads to bad decisions.
Knutson found this anticipation predicts both risky choices and risk-seeking mistakes. This helps explain how large bonuses can shift executives from being risk-averse to risk-seeking, which often leads to huge organizational errors.
And finally, flaw number 7. Rewards can foster short-term thinking, which jeopardizes long-term organizational health.
Research has shown that companies that obsessively issue and guide quarterly earnings deliver significantly lower long-term growth rates than those that focus on broader, less frequent guidance. This short-term myopia chasing the immediate metric for the immediate bonus often leads to underinvesting in critical areas like R&D, which threatens the whole enterprise.
So given these 7 devastating flaws, how do managers avoid destroying motivation when they still have to pay people and incentivize performance? Do we just stop using rewards altogether?
Not at all. The science gives us a clear path forward. We just have to distinguish between the types of tasks. For routine tasks, those that require following a prescribed set of rules to a specific end, like assembly line work, the traditional if-then reward can still work.
Because in that environment, the task is a race, and the reward just encourages you to run faster down an obvious predefined path.
Precisely. Glucksberg's modified candle problem confirmed this. When the tasks were already emptied out of the box, the solution became obvious. It was a simple, linear task. The reward worked then.
But for non-routine or conceptual tasks, where you need invention and creativity, the rules have to change completely.
For these, a manager must use what Pink calls now that rewards. These are unexpected bonuses or treats given after the task is completed and the results are known.
So now that you've finished that complex report and it turned out so well, I'm taking you out to dinner.
Exactly. Since the reward was unexpected and not explicitly promised beforehand, it's experienced as appreciation, not as a mechanism of control. The message shifts from do this for this to thank you for that.
What about non-financial rewards?
Oh, absolutely. Managers should emphasize non-tangible rewards, like sincere praise and positive feedback. Edward Deci found that specific positive feedback can actually enhance intrinsic motivation. The best rewards provide useful information. They focus on effort and strategy, like your use of that new software was really efficient, rather than just the outcome.
This distinction between type X and type I behavior is really the key to embracing this new operating system, Motivation 3.0.
Yes. Motivation 2.0 fostered what Pink calls type X behavior that's fueled by extrinsic rewards. It's focused on the secondary satisfaction, the reward that follows the work. This is the kick-dependent employee that Herzberg described.
But the high performance we need in the 21st century relies on type I behavior.
Type I behavior is fueled by intrinsic challenge and purpose. The main motivator is the inherent satisfaction of the activity itself. This comes from tapping into our universal human needs. And crucially, type I behavior isn't innate. It can be learned and nurtured through the organizational environment.
And type I behavior, unlike the depletable resource of type X motivation, relies on 3 renewable internal nutrients.
Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. These are the 3 pillars of Motivation 3.0, and any type I organization has to systematically cultivate them.
Okay, let's dedicate our time now to diving into the practical application of these 3 pillars. Let's start with autonomy, that innate desire to direct our own lives.
Autonomy is the cornerstone of type I behavior. It's our desire to be self-directed, to have command over our own work. And type I organizations grant this freedom across 4 crucial organizational realms.
Okay, realm 1 is task-defining what people do.
This is embodied by concepts like Atlassian's 20% time or their very productive FedEx days, where engineers spend a full 24 hours working on any non-regular job problem they want to solve. This has a long history, all the way back to 3M's William McKnight, who famously said, "Hire good people and leave them alone."
It's freedom over what you choose to pursue. And realm 2 is time when you do it.
The most famous example here is the results-only work environment, or ROWE. At Best Buy's corporate offices, salaried employees abandoned the clock. They worked as much or as little as it took to complete their responsibilities, and the results were compelling.
What did they find?
Productivity increased by 35% and voluntary turnover dropped significantly. The focus shifts entirely from counting hours to delivering results.
Realm 3 is technique, how people execute their work.
This is critical for jobs that are traditionally seen as routine, like customer service. Instead of forcing reps to follow strict scripts, you grant them decision latitude, the ability to use their personal judgment to solve the customer's problem. Call centers that restrict this autonomy often see staggering annual turnover, sometimes over 100%. Autonomy over technique boosts engagement and massively increases retention.
And the 4th realm, which you said is still pretty rare, is autonomy over team who you work with.
Yes. The ability to choose colleagues or shape your team's structure is a powerful motivator. It aligns with our basic human need for belonging and trust. Organizations that successfully implement these 4 realms move away from the assumption that people are cogs who must be managed, and toward the assumption that they are self-directing players who are seeking a challenge.
That brings us to the 2nd pillar, mastery. That deep-seated urge to just get better at something that really matters. This is where the work becomes its own reward.
Mastery connects directly to flow, the concept from psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. Flow is that optimal human experience where the challenge and your ability are perfectly matched.
You call these Goldilocks tasks, right?
Exactly. They're not so difficult they cause anxiety and not so easy they cause boredom. And when you hit that sweet spot, time just warps, self-consciousness dissolves, and the activity becomes autotelic, which means it is its own reward.
But getting into those moments of flow isn't the same as achieving mastery over a lifetime. That requires following 3 sometimes pretty painful laws.
The first law is that mastery is a mindset, which was articulated by Carol Dweck. She contrasts the fixed mindset, believing your ability is just carved in stone, so you prefer easy successes to avoid looking unskilled, with the incremental or growth mindset.
And the growth mindset completely changes your relationship with effort and your goals.
It does. The growth mindset sees ability as something that can be developed through focused effort. Setbacks are just guideposts for improvement. The fixed mindset prefers performance goals, like getting a perfect score. The growth mindset pursues learning goals, like genuinely understanding a new system. For the growth mindset, effort is a good thing. For the fixed mindset, effort is a sign of weakness or a lack of talent.
The 2nd law is probably the toughest one for organizations to stomach. Mastery is a pain.
Mastery requires a tremendous amount of mentally demanding effort over a long period. Anders Ericsson's groundbreaking research on expert performance established that mastery requires deliberate practice, highly focused, mentally demanding, repetitive effort over a minimum of 10 years. It's grueling work.
And the study on West Point cadets highlights this idea perfectly. It's more about internal commitment than just raw talent.
That's right. Success at West Point was not predicted by incoming IQ scores or physical athleticism. It was predicted by grit, which is defined as perseverance and a sustained passion for long-term goals. The path to mastery is inherently difficult. Those moments of flow just serve to pull you through the necessary, often repetitive, deliberate practice that's required.
And the final law speaks to the endless nature of this chase. Mastery is an asymptote.
An asymptote is a line that you continuously approach but you never quite reach. Full, complete mastery is impossible to realize, and it's this very impossibility, this constant state of getting closer, that is the enduring source of intrinsic joy. It's the ultimate sustaining force because you can never run out of mountain to climb. The chase itself becomes the reward.
Finally, we get to the third and arguably most powerful pillar of Motivation 3.0. Purpose. The yearning to serve something larger and more significant than ourselves.
The need for purpose is being amplified by a massive demographic shift. Beginning in the mid-2000s, the baby boomer generation began turning 60, creating what's been called a thunderstorm of purpose. They're beginning to ask, when am I going to do something that truly matters?
And given the sheer size of that generation, that question is driving organizational change on a massive scale.
Yes. This generation, the wealthiest and best educated the world has ever known, is shifting the organizational focus away from Motivation 2.0's historical emphasis on profit maximization to Motivation 3.0's priority on purpose maximization.
And we see this shift reflected so clearly in the structure of newer, purpose-driven companies.
Look at Thomas Shoes. They define themselves as a for-profit company with giving at its core. The purpose motive, the one-for-one model, is embedded in their fundamental business model. It's not just bolted on as an afterthought or a seasonal charity drive.
And this sense of purpose is being actively cultivated in our future leaders, too.
Consider the Harvard MBA oath, which was fashioned by students in 2009. They pledged fealty to the greater good and committed to striving for sustainable economic, social, and environmental prosperity. This is a deliberate shift away from the Type X language of narrow efficiency and superiority toward ideals that genuinely rouse human hearts, like honor and truth.
But managers have to be extremely careful not to accidentally undermine this intrinsic sense of purpose with poorly designed controls.
That is a crucial risk. Organizations that reduce noble goals like promoting diversity or ethics to a compliance checklist actually crowd out the intrinsic motivation for doing the right thing. If diversity just becomes a series of requirements to meet to avoid a lawsuit, employees shift from genuinely wanting to pursue equity to simply checking boxes on a mandated sheet. The extrinsic control destroys the intrinsic value.
Okay, before we wrap up, we have to address the issue that never really goes away: compensation. If rewards are so problematic, how does a Type I organization pay people without destroying their intrinsic motivation?
The strategy is encapsulated in the Zen of compensation. The best use of money is to structure it in such a way that the issue of money is taken off the table, allowing people to focus entirely on the intrinsic satisfaction of the work itself. This requires 3 key techniques.
Okay, number 1, establishing fairness.
You must ensure internal and external fairness. Internal fairness means paying people in line with their colleagues based on responsibility and tenure. External fairness means paying people in line with industry peers. Unfairness is a profound demotivator. Fairness is just the prerequisite for motivation to even occur. If an employee feels they are being paid unfairly, any argument for intrinsic motivation will always fall on deaf ears.
Number 2 is a little counterintuitive: pay more.
This is the strategy identified by economists George Akerlof and Janet Yellen. Paying more than the average market rate, even just slightly above, attracts better talent, drastically reduces turnover, and boosts morale. It effectively bypasses the need for all those constant if-then rewards. High base pay is a far better commitment booster than a hyper-complex bonus structure.
And number 3, if you absolutely have to use metrics for bonuses, they have to be subtle and modest.
That's right. The metric should be wide-ranging, relevant, and hard to game. So instead of focusing on a single, easily manipulated metric like next quarter's sales, you should use varied measures: sales, customer satisfaction, coworker evaluations, 360-degree feedback to encourage holistic good work. And the payoff for reaching these targets must be modest, avoiding those massive rewards that narrow focus, encourage addiction, and promote unethical shortcuts. The goal is information and acknowledgement, not control.
This has been such a critical exploration. We've moved all the way from the satisfaction of basic needs to the cultivation of our internal drives. We've charted the course from Maslow's hierarchy through Herzberg's crucial distinction between hygiene and motivators, and finally landed in Pink's Motivation 3.0, focusing on autonomy, mastery, and purpose.
The overall implication for you, whether you're a manager or an organizational leader, is clear. Stop trying to manipulate human behavior with external controls for conceptual tasks. Instead, your job is to create an environment that systematically supports those three universal human needs.
And as we close out, let's just reflect one last time on Herzberg's potent challenge, which I think summarizes the entire problem of Motivation 2.0.
Herzberg concluded that if you have employees in a job, you must find a way to use them. If you can't fully utilize their potential and you can't get rid of them, perhaps due to labor laws or necessity, you have created a profound motivational problem. This underutilized, disengaged employee is the true, costly consequence of running a Motivation 2.0 operating system in a 21st century economy.
So for your actionable takeaway from this whole discussion, we challenge you to conduct an autonomy audit in your own team or organization this week.
Ask your team, perhaps anonymously, to rate their current level of freedom across Pink's 4 realms: task, time, technique, and team. If your overall autonomy rating is healthy, but you find a disproportionately low score in one area, say technique, because they feel overly scripted, you have identified your organizational autonomy weak spot. Focus your job enrichment and type I cultivation efforts there, and watch the performance improve.
Thank you for joining us for this Pocket MBA. We'll see you on the next exploration into what truly drives organizational success.